There's something about the deep rumble of a naturally aspirated V12 that commands respect. Maybe it's the unmistakable roar of power. Maybe it's the history built into every stitch of Italian leather. Or maybe it's just the way jaws drop when the matty black Lamborghini Aventador rolls out of my garage. Either way, that morning I took it out for a spin around the neighborhood. The last thing I expected was for a teenager with a superiority complex and his mother's inflated ego to try to claim it, like it was some community asset managed by the HOA. Let me back up a bit. I moved into this suburban neighborhood just under a year ago. Not because I wanted the cookie-cutter homes, the tight lawns, or the pastel-painted fences. I moved here because it was close to the private airstrip I use for business. The property had a 5-car garage for my growing collection, and the zoning laws were tight enough to keep things quiet. I'm a collector, an entrepreneur, and a man who has earned every engine in his stable. But in the world of homeowner associations, merit doesn't always matter. Power does. Or at least the illusion of it. Karen. I don't even need to change. Her name, because she lives up to it in every possible way, was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. Blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, and an ever-present clipboard in hand, she marched up and down the neighborhood like she was running for Dictator of the Year. From the first week, she warned me about excessive engine noise, non-HOA-approved landscaping, and unauthorized luxury branding on my garage. Yeah, apparently, even my garage wrap, which featured a mural of vintage Ferraris, was somehow disruptive to community standards. I ignored her. Mostly. My compliance was passive and my tolerance had limits. But I never expected the situation to spiral the way it did. Not until her son entered the picture. Cody. That was the punk's name. 17, going on 45. Attitude of a Wall Street banker with none of the earnings. He'd seen my Aventador a few times, always circling like a shark on his electric scooter, the kind that looked more expensive than his GPA. One afternoon, he actually waited at the end of my driveway as I pulled in, sunglasses perched atop his backwards cap, arms folded like a bouncer at a nightclub. I opened the scissor doors and stepped out. That's when he dropped the line that would ignite everything. "Hey, man," he started casually. "My mom runs the HOA, so technically everything in the neighborhood is under our authority, including that Lambo." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me?" he said, cocky smirk intact. "She says it's inappropriate for a car like that to be in a neighborhood like this. Bad for image, bad for property value. But I told her I'd take care of it." He stepped forward, placing one hand on the hood of my car. "I'll take it off your hands. Won't report you to the board if you hand over the keys now." Now, I've been insulted in boardrooms. I've dealt with tech CEOs, Wall Street raiders, and litigation-happy competitors. But this was a new level of entitlement. I looked at his smug face, his thin gold chain, his too clean sneakers, and tried not to laugh. "You think because your mom bosses around a few neighbors with lawn rules that you can take my car?" He shrugged. "You're not allowed to keep cars like this here anyway. Read the bylaws. It's not even street legal with those mods." I slowly walked around to the other side of the car and leaned back against the door. "Let me guess. You want me to gift you a $400,000 supercar to keep peace in the cul-de-sac?" He grinned. "Exactly. You're catching on. Better to avoid the paperwork. Here's what I'll give you," I said calmly. "A chance to take your hand off my hood before I call the police." He didn't move. "You think the cops care what I do in this neighborhood? My mom's on the community council. HOA has the sheriff on speed dial." I pulled out my phone, flipped to the security feed, and turned it toward him. "Cool," I said. "Then they won't mind reviewing the footage of you trespassing, threatening, and attempting to extort property." He blinked. The grin slipped. "I'd already saved the video to my cloud." He pulled his hand back. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Oh, I sure hope not," I said, stepping forward. because now I'm going to show your mother exactly who she's raised, and exactly how badly that's about to backfire. The next morning, a formal complaint was placed in my mailbox. HOA citation for vehicle exceeding noise levels, non-standard garage visuals, and unauthorized property storage. 3 strikes. HOA Karen had gone from petty to punitive in under 24 hours. But here's the thing. I don't play defense. I play strategy. I'd been quietly documenting every interaction, every paper trail, and every bylaw inconsistency since I moved in. The garage wrap? Approved in writing 6 months ago. The noise complaints? I had dB level readings proving they were below city threshold. And the Lamborghini? Registered, emissions certified, and cleared by the DMV. I gathered my documents, emailed my attorney, and prepped my counteroffensive. But then I noticed something even more interesting. Cody had been parking his modified BMW illegally in front of fire hydrants and neighbor driveways. On multiple nights. I had it all on footage. Submitted my own stack of complaints, anonymously at first. Then I scheduled a private meeting with 2 board members not aligned with Karen. Turns out they'd been looking for a reason to audit her power plays for months. Meanwhile, Cody didn't back down. He doubled down. One morning, I found my Lambos, tires slashed. The local sheriff said it could have been kids messing around, but my security cam showed a hooded figure around the car at 3:17 a.m. Guess what size sneakers he was wearing? 12, same as Cody. Now I had vandalism charges pending. The neighborhood was whispering. Karen tried to run damage control by hosting a community brunch, but I RSVP'd with a letter from my attorney instead. The next twist? Cody showed up at my door again. This time, with 3 of his friends, phones out, trying to film some kind of fake repossession stunt for social media. He was still convinced that public pressure and HOA threats would make me fold. But this time, I wasn't just prepared, I was armed. Legally. I opened the door, greeted them, and played along for exactly 15 seconds, just long enough for the police cruiser I'd called 10 minutes prior to pull up behind them. Cody looked over his shoulder and froze. One of the officers stepped out. "We've had a report of trespassing, vandalism, and attempted grand theft auto." Cody's friends bolted. He stayed frozen, staring at me like a deer in headlights. The officer placed him in cuffs without a word. Karen came running from 2 houses down, screeching like a banshee. "He didn't do anything. This is a misunderstanding. He's just a kid." But it was too late. The footage, the vandalism, the threats, all documented. As the cruiser pulled away with Cody in the back seat, Karen turned to me and hissed, "You'll regret this." I just smiled. Not as much as you'll regret thinking your title gives you power over people who earned everything they have. And that was just the beginning. The sound of the police cruiser taking Cody away should have been the end. For most people, it would have been. But Karen wasn't most people. The moment her son's wrists were wrapped in steel and her reputation started to unravel, something inside her snapped. What had started as an entitled power trip now evolved into a full-blown vendetta. She was no longer just the queen of the HOA. She saw herself as a wronged monarch, one with a holy mission to strike down the man who had dared to expose her son and challenge her self-created kingdom. And unfortunately for her, I had spent a lifetime preparing for battles just like this one. 2 days after Cody's arrest, I received an emergency notice taped to my garage door, in all caps, red ink. Immediate HOA compliance review, failure. To respond will result in escalation. It was ridiculous, even by Karen standards, and laughably transparent. I removed the notice, scanned it, and forwarded it to my lawyer with the subject line, "Queen Karen declares war." What Karen didn't realize, and still doesn't, I think, is that I'd been preparing for this level of confrontation ever since I bought the property. Not because I expected it from her specifically, but because any place governed by an HOA, especially one run like a fiefdom, is a legal minefield. And I don't step into minefields unless I've already mapped every step out. That same day, I filed for a formal injunction to prevent further harassment. I also sent a cease and desist letter through my attorney to the HOA board, specifically naming Karen as the source of ongoing defamation, property interference, and personal threats. She didn't like that. At all. So she escalated. Within a week, my mailbox was flooded with new citations, alleged noise violations, unkempt hedges, despite the fact my lawn was professionally maintained and literally award-winning. Inappropriate signage, referring to the small "Smile You're on camera" sticker on my front door. Even a warning about non-conforming lighting fixtures, which was rich considering she still had outdated incandescent bulbs lining her entire fence line. But I didn't take the bait. Not yet. Instead, I leaned into silence. I let her scream into the void, thinking she was gaining ground. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I went to work. You see, Karen's influence over the HOA board was strong, but not absolute. Over the months, I'd lived there. I'd taken the time to build quiet rapport with other board members. A retired Air Force colonel, a no-nonsense accountant, a mother of 4 who hated Karen's weekly drama. They were frustrated, exhausted, and more importantly, ready to listen. I requested a private board review citing continued HOA overreach and misconduct. During that meeting, I presented a comprehensive file, copies of bylaws Karen had selectively enforced, videos of her screaming at delivery drivers, surveillance of her son vandalizing property, and an extensive paper trail of my own compliance. The board was stunned. The colonel actually leaned forward and said, "This is the kind of file we wish we'd had 3 years ago." Turns out Karen had been pulling this power trip long before I arrived. Several families had moved out quietly after clashing with her. One even filed a complaint with the county, but no one had stuck around to fight. Until me. The board issued a temporary suspension of Karen's enforcement privileges, a move that clearly infuriated her. She stood on her porch the next morning with a whistle and a clipboard, trying to bark orders at the local landscapers. No one listened. That same day, I had my Lamborghini detailed in the driveway, sun glinting off every inch of its black chrome wrap. I played Vivaldi's 4 Seasons through the garage speakers just loud enough for Karen to hear, sipping coffee in a lawn chair while my detailer worked. It wasn't a show of arrogance, it was a symbol of the line that had been crossed, and the one that would never be crossed again. But Karen, in her desperation, pulled her last card. She called for a neighborhood-wide special vote to permanently remove me from the HOA for disruptive behavior. She went door to door, peddling lies, saying I was violent, dangerous, and a threat to community peace. But what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing my own message. I crafted a personal letter for every neighbor. Attached was a copy of the footage of Cody's vandalism, records of Karen's targeted harassment, and my formal documentation of every bogus citation I'd received. I added a note. All I've ever wanted was to live peacefully and respect everyone's space. I love this neighborhood. I love this community. But I won't be bullied. And I won't let anyone else be bullied either. This ends now. The night before the vote, Karen made one last attempt. She stood outside my home, yelling into a megaphone. I kid you not. This man doesn't belong here. He's corrupting our values. He doesn't respect authority. Ironically, she was standing next to a neighbor's mailbox when the sheriff pulled up. I had filed a noise disturbance complaint, and the irony wasn't lost on the deputy who responded. The same one who arrested Cody. He looked Karen dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, it's time to go home." The next morning, the community voted. Karen's motion to remove me failed, 83-3. The board's motion to suspend her indefinitely passed unanimously. But that's not where the story ends. 2 weeks later, a county investigator showed up on my doorstep. Turns out, multiple former residents, inspired by what happened, had filed renewed complaints against Karen and her son. Fraudulent fines, intimidation tactics, misuse of HOA funds, and I had the most extensive evidence of all. They opened an investigation. Within a month, Karen received a formal notice that she was under review for criminal HOA misconduct. Turns out she'd been charging extra fees to certain residents and pocketing the difference. She'd also misrepresented her son as a community enforcement liaison in official emails, a made-up title used to intimidate renters. Fraud, intimidation, embezzlement. By the end of that summer, Karen had sold her home and moved 2 states away. Cody was attending mandatory counseling as part of his juvenile plea agreement, and the HOA, it was under new leadership, real leadership. The board president came to visit me one afternoon, brought cookies, told me the neighborhood had never been more peaceful. "You didn't just stand up to her," he said. "You saved this place." I nodded quietly. It wasn't about saving a neighborhood. It was about setting a standard. That entitlement isn't a license. That power without principle always collapses, and that if someone ever lays a hand on what you've earned, you don't scream, you don't threaten, you document, prepare, and take them down with truth. My Lamborghini still sits in the garage. Matte black, clean lines, purring like a panther every time I fire her up. But now, every time I drive through the neighborhood, it's not with fear of HOA citations or petty drama. Now it's with respect, and no Karen or her son will ever change that again.